Welcome to my presentation, Regenerative Agriculture at a Crossroads, Consumer Perceptions of Food Certifications and the Future of Sustainable Food Systems. As we get started, I want to paint a picture for you. Regenerative agriculture does hold tremendous promise for improving soil health, enhancing the nutritional value of the food on our plates, just like the picture you see in my background. It fosters vibrant underground ecosystems, from earthworms and microbes to the fungal networks that shuttle nutrients to plants like living superhighways. By reducing or eliminating the need for chemicals, pesticides, and fertilizers, regenerative methods lower costs for farmers while protecting our rivers, oceans, and such from toxic runoff, too much salt. This can ultimately mean that biodiversity is preserved. Touted as a holistic solution to global health and climate challenges, regenerative agriculture is gaining attention. Some would even argue that it is mainstreaming. But despite claims that it is going mainstream, what my research indicates, including consumer interviews and secondary data from other published research, it ultimately suggests that we're not quite there yet. We have a life changing solution within reach, but to realize its full potential, we must align our collective efforts. We must build trust, drive awareness, and accelerate adoption. This is a headline from 7 years ago now. Regenerative Organic Certification wants to be the ethical standard to rule them all. Now, the Regenerative Organic Alliance, they are the effort that backs this certification, emerged in response to this need for clarity, aiming to help consumers understand what it truly means to grow food and fiber in a way that regenerates the planet. Their Regenerative Organic Certified standard builds on USDA Organic, requiring organic certification as a prerequisite, as a baseline. This ensures that certified products are non-GMO while also incorporating rigorous standards for animal welfare, fair labor, and fair trade. The ROC or ROC movement for Regenerative Organic Certified was championed by the Patagonia founder, Yvon Chouinard, alongside mission-driven brands like Lundberg Family Farms, who has a variety of rice and grain products, Lotus Foods in a similar space, and Dr. Bronner's soaps, their magic soaps. The shared vision of these companies and all those behind the scenes was to ultimately unify multiple ethical certifications like those that you see on the screen under one regenerative standard. This could offer simplicity and integrity in a crowded label landscape. And in many cases, I think this may have come because they were coming from the brand perspective, what I've called the over-badge-ification. I know it's not a word, but it conveys a meaning. You start to see a product that has 16 badges on it. So while this approach could reduce what over-badgification may already exist in the marketplace of ethical products, it could potentially replace the need for these multiple certifications at the same time and carry a strategic advantage. Because if ROC was to become the dominant standard, it consolidates value for certifiers and could reduce the costs for brands as well. But might it also lift up USDA Organic for the time being? Sure. Could it eliminate the need for these three? And what would that mean for the future? But for this model to succeed, consumer understanding must align with the standards intent for ROC certified. The question 7 years after this Fast Company article was spotlighted really remains with one essential question. Do consumers really understand what regenerative means, especially as defined by the Regenerative Organic Alliance to include all of these things? It may even one day mean USDA Organic would not be needed. Is this the best path? The short answer to the overall question of whether all of these other certifications could be eliminated, whether the consumer really understands regenerative, is not quite yet. And part of this challenge lies in the fact that regenerative is being defined in multiple and sometimes conflicting ways. One such example is REGENIFIED, a newer certification co-founded by rancher and farmer Gabe Brown. He's widely recognized for his leadership in regenerative practices and is even prominently featured in the documentary film Common Ground, the sequel to Kiss the Ground, which he also was centered in. In this depiction, you see him wearing a red cape as a symbolic hero of soil restoration. Unlike the ROC standard, Regenified does not require organic certification. Its framework focuses on 5 stages of implementation over a 10-year period, beginning with practices like no-till farming, cover cropping, and a gradual reduction in synthetic inputs. That means chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Because it doesn't require organic, Regenified also allows the use of GMOs and does not mandate fair labor practices, animal welfare standards, or third party certification in those areas. This divergence in approach highlights a growing tension within the movement. Competing definitions ultimately risk diluting the term regenerative and sowing confusion among consumers, especially when these certifications appear side by side on store shelves. Without a shared understanding, we risk undermining consumer trust and stalling the very progress that we hope to accelerate. So, this reveals our research question. As we've just seen, the term regenerative is being interpreted and implemented in very different ways. This creates a complex landscape for consumers, one filled with competing certifications, overlapping values, and varying levels of transparency. This led me to ask a deeper question. What are the underlying mechanisms that shape how consumers perceive these third party certifications like regenerative, organic, and non GMO? And importantly, do these perceptions align or diverge from the narratives being shared by the farmers producing the food, the brands marketing them, and the organizations doing the certifying? By exploring this question, my goal is to better understand where communication gaps lie and build potential bridges. Overall, I'm presenting here the research I would like to conduct. As a focus of this exercise, we're going to be focusing on the one in-depth interview, but in the interest of a broader understanding, I'm sharing the entire methodology. This research employs a mixed method design, including a qualitative first phase rooted in constructivist grounded theory and shaped by the epistemological foundations of critical realism, a la Basker and his work. I'm referencing 2013 because that's the edition of the book I have, and descriptive interpretism by Geertz in 1973. These perspectives guide both the interpretive and structural layers of analysis, seeking to understand the meanings participants ascribe to certifications and the broad socioeconomic forces that influence their views, such as affordability, marketing saturation, and regulatory ambiguity. Focus groups of 6 to 10 individuals will recruit from the participants of our in depth interviews, as well as individuals recruited from natural foods and trade events. This will be conducted in a snowball method through industry contacts that I already have and communities I'm able to access locally here in Santa Cruz and when traveling for natural trade events. Focus groups may be conducted in person, online via Zoom, and then shift on to phase 2, in which quantitative online surveys will help refine the understanding that we've already learned in phase 1. Sequentiality is really important here, as the survey line will seek to clarify what we've already learned in phase 1. Since online surveys are also much more scalable than focus groups or in-depth interviews, this will enable us to touch more individuals and really see if we can gain data that shifts understanding from a variety of different demographics. This data can also help us ensure that any bias that I may bring to the ground is also limited. Then, in a third and final phase, we will comparatively assess research findings against what our qualitative and quantitative data supports. And for the purposes of today's presentation, again, we are focusing on just that one in-depth interview that we did as a test. And therefore, we should take everything that we share here with a bit of a grain of salt. This is only built on that foundation at the present time. So for my initial participant selection, I'm calling them Freddie, a US-based consumer who's sustainability aware, has a higher education background. In this case, they have a master's of science, and a regular organic food buyer. This recruitment was purposeful, sampling someone that is representative of a somewhat informed consumer demographic who also happens to be a friend, so they may be a little forgiving of me in this inaugural process. And snowball chain recruitment from this point forward will be used. Beyond this initial interviewee, our intention was to keep the scope broad and require that they be 18 plus. They're buying their own food. They purchase organic, non-GMO, fair trade, or regenerative certified products occasionally or more frequently. They're willing to participate in an interview and provide experiential insights into food labeling, trust, and sustainability. And they would also be open to participating in future focus groups. Of course, this isn't a requirement. They can exit the study at any time, but it would also be nice to be able to follow participant one and their solo experience to participant one in a focus group to see how these experiences differ. This is in part to see if there is a front stage perspective, something that might be more performative in a group setting versus how they truly feel when they're engaged in a one-on-one setting. Of note as well is that participants might go from focus group to in-depth interviews, depending on how recruitment occurred. So the interview process, plainly stated, was semi-structured. This allowed for flexibility and the ability to follow the through line of their thought patterns. We recorded and transcribed using Zoom and then manually cleaned the data. I manually cleaned it in a clean transcription mode, but ultimately left in a lot of their verbal hiccups and things along those lines. And the first cycle coding was followed by axial and focused coding to extract and analyze themes. Went forwards and backwards in this process a few times just to make sure that the data was supporting the message I was seeing. And what we came through with was 3 emergent themes: embodied pragmatism. This ultimately meant that in everyday food choices, participant is more likely to buy based on what looks good. Navigating certification fog. They lack clarity of what certifications truly mean or question their knowledge, pausing, admitting in this case that they didn't even understand the word regenerative as it related to food because they hadn't seen that in action. They also conveyed that the certifications are sometimes used as a marketing tool rather than conveying actual substance. So there's a bit of doubt in with that fog. And then ethical echoes. The values that influence them don't necessarily drive behavior through to purchase. And if we look at this whole perspective, this is consistent with prior researchers who have ascribed aspirational sustainability, like Johnston et al. And Guthman in 2011 and 2003, respectively. It may also be consistent with what Vermeir and Verbeke described as the attitude behavior intention gap in 2006. This is also something I do intend to explore in focus groups as we seek to identify whether specific participants have different front stage perspectives than the backstage ones that they would clearly share in a one-on-one setting. And this is where we really draw that from. I'm sharing the transcripts here, possibly cleaned for an or two. But an example of embodied pragmatism: price is a big factor. What looks good or seems healthy. I'm eating more vegetables at this time. Another example of embodied pragmatism: Winco is a fairly affordable place and it's employee owned. They have a really good selection of fruits and vegetables, and they have a really good bulk section as well. Navigating certification fog. I would guess regenerative means it's grown on your farm sustainably with crop rotations, but I don't know if that's what it actually means. Again, fairly accurate, but they still have fog. Another quote: I feel like things like non-GMO and organic are used as a marketing tool, but I don't necessarily associate that with the ethics of the company. So again, there's 2 things that we see in this statement, and we'll get to that in a moment. And then ethical echoes. More people should have access to affordable produce from small farms. But what you'll note is that when we get into this language, they're often conveying 2 things in a simple sentence. So ethical echoes and it's employee owned. You could also see ethical echoes and this just statement just above ethical concerns right here. She says, but I don't necessarily associate that with the ethics of the company. When we get to looking at patterns and insights, I envision this Venn diagram. It feels like, in this case in particular, and also in what I'm seeing in the research, that consumers are pragmatic. They're often also aspirational, but those seeds of doubt can enter the space. They may be cautious of things like greenwashing or purpose washing. So, to focus on improving clarity and messaging, we must really learn more about consumer heuristics and close perception gaps. How can they better learn on their own when they're shopping in the aisle, when they are experiencing products, when they are seeing things in media? How can we do better? One thing that I think we need to persistently do is really test how they feel about what they see on packaging. Packaging is often the first time that they might interface with a specific certification. And so I share two examples here, both of which were generated with the help of AI. Thank you very much, ChatGPT and Sora. But what you'll see here on the left is a package of kettle corn. Then, really, if it just had the three badges of Non-GMO Project Verified, USDA Organic, and the ROC certification, which is much less known, you wouldn't necessarily understand that the product was regenerative. And often, this badge for regenerative organic is seen just like this little circle. So I added the word regenerative to the bottom. Now, you could show consumers this with and without the word regenerative to ask them what they think this product's core differentiators are and dig in a little bit further. Or you could take another approach and actually update the badge or logo to include the three words Regenerative Organic Certified. Again, hats off to ChatGPT for creating this logo. But as you'll see, it's two different approaches to virtually the same thing. And this would reinforce a certification that isn't as well known even 7 years later. It's nice to use these sorts of efforts in focus groups, but they can also be assessed one on one in an interview setting and through online surveys. What do you prefer, A versus B? Why? What does this mean to you? Things like that. As we dive into the interpretation of findings, I again see three basic perspectives. The certification systems lack clarity and trust to drive consistent behavior. Food choices are shaped by embodied reasoning, sensory cues, and price. And then ethical concerns, they matter, but only conditionally once other needs are met. These findings are supported by literature on the credibility gap in certification systems, and also cultural and narrative resonance is needed to close the gap. The in depth interview really suggests that certification systems are not the primary drivers of consumers' behavior. Instead, food choices are shaped by those embodied experiences. Now, while ethical values like sustainability or fairness may continue to inform their identity, they don't consistently translate into purchase decisions unless they align with everyday heuristics like freshness and affordability. That is what we mean by conditional. And this disconnect points to a deeper issue. Ultimately, current certification systems lack the narrative and sensory resonance needed to drive behavior and action. These insights carry significant implications for food systems stakeholders. Certifications must move beyond technical compliance and align with the way that consumers actually make decisions. These insights carry significant implications for food systems stakeholders. Certifications must move beyond technical compliance and align with the way that consumers actually make decisions through practical cues and trust based contexts. We can do this through narrative integration, embedding certifications into emotional and sensory storytelling. As Block et al. In 2011 suggest, food well being is about more than nutrients, it's about nurturance. Moving on to trust based ecologies, these are interfaces often in retail or at the point of sale. We can leverage trusted relationships like local co ops to help consumers link values to choices. That could also be things like farmers markets and even online stores that they trust. There are examples that are really focused on only offering ethical products. We can also move to simplified signage in these retail environments. and education-focused label design, using plain language and sensory appeals at the point of purchase, as Hodges and Stocking suggest in 2017. And label design can move to being clearer, more front-facing with visual language, and not ignoring the use of the word regenerative prominently, especially when this is a point of differentiation. Ultimately, consumers don't yet understand whether or not it means organic, and even some of the regenerative certifications disagree on that. And then policy. We can improve policy design, improve access to certified products through subsidies and targeted education. This could include things like SNAP, which provides some interesting benefits for consumers in my neck of the woods in Santa Cruz County, and I think this is broadly available in California. People who have SNAP, which is a subsistence program offered by the government, essentially food stamps, are able to turn in their food stamps for tokens worth double the amount at our local farmers markets. The foods offered are grown locally, of course, within 100 miles typically. And there are CSAs present also offering their regenerative baskets, which is a movement, I think, in the right direction. And it serves as yet another education point for the audience. This initial analysis reveals that while values like sustainability and ethics do matter to consumers, they rarely override those practical concerns. Certification systems remain secondary, frequently misunderstood, and not yet trusted as intuitive guides. So, to close the gap between ideology and action, brands, certifiers, and policymakers must recognize that consumer behavior is contextually and materially constrained. This means aligning messaging strategies and everyday decision making through story, trust, and clarity. In short, don't sell the public short. Help them act on their values by meeting them where they are. To improve consumer heuristics, simplify the decision-making process, provide clear information, and use strategic framing to guide choices. This project opens the door to several important areas of continued inquiry: expanded sampling to interview more diverse consumers across knowledge and across income levels, to look at cross-stakeholder comparison, cross from consumer perceptions and intentions with those of the certifiers, brands, and even the farmers, to then look at testing of labels using mock packaging figures 1 and 2 as examples within this session, and focus groups, as well as in one-on-ones and even in online surveys, to evaluate design effectiveness and ultimately what the consumer is conveying, it says, to them. When are we getting the most clarity? And this will also further help us map consumer heuristics, explore how consumers navigate that trust, taste, and ethics when certifications are presented contextually on products. And what I'll note here is that, as with any really great marketing design program, you would look between testing label designs and mapping heuristics over and over and over again. These almost go cyclically back and forth, much like in design thinking as performed in different business and product development settings. Now, improving that UI UX perspective may be a consumer construct that comes from marketers' best practices, but we shouldn't ignore it here either. And so if we can take those learnings from that design thinking perspective and also from general best marketing practices to enable user interface and user experience to be its absolute best, then we will do much more to support the regenerative language of our future, to support understanding what this means, and to support the movement. With that, I want to thank you for taking this time with me today. We started with this one image of a plant growing with all this beautiful hope around it. And the intention of regenerative agriculture and many of these other climate solutions is to help us move from that bubble of hope into the bubble of reality that I pictured to the right. I encourage you to take a look at my podcast, Care More, Be Better. I often cover topics of regeneration on the show from the brand perspective, from the research perspective, and more. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, and I encourage you to reach out with questions. With that, I want to thank you for your time.